Every time I get to talk to you guys about this brand, it truly is a pinch me moment. And that is Skims. I have been such a fan of all Skims products for years now, but specifically, I cannot stop raving about their intimates. Intimates are the foundation of every outfit, in my opinion, and making sure that I'm wearing pieces that are comfortable and functional have always been a struggle for me. Skims is the only brand that I have found that keeps me secured and comfortable. For example, their Fits Everybody Razorback bralette has been a game changer for me. I am so supported throughout the whole day. I'm never tugging or adjusting straps or feeling insecure about the bralette or the way that it's making me look. I also have the Fits Everybody Scoop Neck bralette, and you guys, this is amazing. It is perfect for giving you that lift while also giving that same support. It's a 10 out of 10 all the way around. So shop Skims Best Intimates, including the Fits Everybody collection and more at skims.com and Skims stores. After you place your order, be sure to let them know that I sent you. Select podcast in the survey and be sure to select my show in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the Fits Everybody gift for your Valentine or for yourself, Skims just launched their best Valentine's shop ever, available in sizes for women, men, and kids. Hello everyone, what is up? Welcome back to another episode of Killer Instinct, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're new here, hi, my name is Savannah and I am your host of Killer Instinct. Before we get started, make sure you go ahead and hit the subscribe button. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here on the podcast every single Wednesday. You are not going to want to miss it. We also upload the video version onto YouTube on Wednesdays as well. So make sure you are subscribed. And if you're in the market for more exclusive Killer Instinct content, you can always find us over on Patreon, where for $10 a month, you will receive 3 additional full-length Killer Instinct exclusive episodes over there, in addition to the 4 that we post here every month as well. So you're basically getting double the content over there, and that link will always be in the description box below. Now, with that all being said, I am so eager to talk about this case with you guys. This is a case where I am so curious to know what you have to say. As you guys can tell by the title, today we are talking about the unsolved disappearance of Jodi Huisentruit. This is a case that baffled me when I first read about it, and when I was doing my research, I just couldn't wrap my mind around what exactly happened here, and I'm so curious to know what you think the truth in this case really is. So with that being said, we are going to jump right on into it today. Jodi Huisentruit was born on June 5th, 1968 in Long Prairie, Minnesota, to her parents, Maurice and Jane Huisentruit. Jodi grew up in a very loving family. She was known as a Spitfire. She got named class clown in school, and as she got older, she developed a passion for broadcast journalism. Jodi's role model growing up was Connie Chung, which, if you don't know, was a very, very prominent female journalist, and Jodi wanted to be just like her. Now, Jodi's other interests in life included golf. She actually excelled in this in high school and won state with her high school team. And after graduating from high school, she went on to attend St. Cloud State University, where she studied mass communications and speech communications and graduated in 1990. Jodi had many big dreams for her life and her future, and one of her main career goals was to be one of the top female broadcasters in the country. Like I mentioned, she had a huge passion for broadcast journalism, and that is the route that Jodi wanted to take. So, with that being said, her very first job in television was when she was interning at a news station in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. After her internships, she moved to Alexandria, Minnesota, where she worked at a station called KSAX. Then, in the fall of 1994, she got a job in Mason City, Iowa, working for a news station called KIMT. Now, at the time of Jodi's disappearance, Disappearance. She had been working at KIMT for approximately a year and a half. She helped them produce the morning show, which ran from about 6 a.m. to 7 a.m. every single day. And this was a show that she worked on with a producer named Amy Coons, as well as a meteorologist. Now, I want to talk about Mason City, Iowa for a moment to kind of give you a better understanding at the location that we're talking about here. So this was a smaller city, and while it was generally considered a safe area, there were some parts of town that you were known to avoid when living in Mason City because of the safety concerns. And so because of that, you always had to be vigilant, you always had to be aware, and you always had to be cautious of your surroundings. And with Mason City being such a small town, with Jodi being on the morning show for KIMT, she really became a public figure in the area, which sometimes came with its perks, but oftentimes came with its own sets of precautions pertaining to safety. And just in general, I feel like we need to talk about this because broadcasters are known to have to deal with their fair share of stalkers, especially at that time. You know, it wasn't like the times we're in now with social media and having such easy access to everyone, and there's all these influencers, and your social media feed is flooded with all of these different people. In this time frame that we're talking about, 1995, Jodi was considered the local celebrity because she was on the news, because she was a broadcaster. The locals in Mason City, Iowa knew her and, for all things considered, loved her. But again, broadcasters did and still do have to deal with their fair share of stalkers. Oftentimes, and especially in this time frame, people will develop parasocial relationships with someone who they think that they know. And that parasocial relationship can sometimes develop into an obsession. And it's even more dangerous for news anchors in these small towns, or even the ones that are in bigger cities, because people believe that they actually know these broadcasters. Because when you think about it, these broadcasters are oftentimes the first people that these stalkers are seeing in the morning. They're the first people that are talking to them, the first people on their TV screens. They're technically in their living room or in their kitchen or in their bedroom with them, which sometimes, if you do believe that you have a parasocial relationship with someone, or if that obsession is growing, that only amplifies it. And along with that, all of Jodi's personal information, I'm talking her phone number and her address, this was all very easily accessible to the public because all anyone would have to do was look in the phone book and they would find it. Now, knowing what we know and just how far we've developed, it seems crazy to do that. It seems crazy to be able to open up a phone book and find anyone's address or anyone's phone number. But that's what you were able to do at that time. And knowing this, Jodi did take her safety very seriously. She was always very precautious. She even took self-defense classes in order to defend herself if she ever needed to. And there was one instance where Jodi did have to report to the police. In October of 1994, Jodi reported to the Mason City Police Department that she was being followed by someone in a white pickup truck while she was jogging one afternoon. Now, as you can imagine, this shook Jodi up pretty badly, and she wanted to make the police aware of it. They became aware of it, they took the report, but that's really all that came of it. Now, this case begins on the early morning hours of June 27th, 1995 at approximately 4:10 a.m. At this time, the producer at KIMT, who, like I said, her name was Amy realized that Jodi was not at the station at the time that she was supposed to be there. Typically, every morning, Jodi would arrive to KIMT at 4 o'clock in the morning to get ready and prepared for her 6 a.m. show. But on this particular morning, Jodi was not there. So because of this, Amy picked up the phone and called Jodi. And after a few rings, Jodi actually answered. On the phone, Jodi explained that she overslept and that she was going to rush over to the station and be there within the next 10 to 15 minutes, considering Jodi's apartment was only a mile away from the news station. Now, Amy and Jodi had spoken previously when they first started out on the morning show that they were always going to keep each other accountable because because getting there at 4 a.m., that is a tall order sometimes. That is an early call time. And Amy and Jodi told each other that they would always keep each other accountable if they were late. They would always give each other a wake-up call just to make sure that they were awake and going to come into the station before the show. It was just a way of them having each other's backs. So that is what Amy was doing on this particular morning. But by 4:30 a.m., when Jodi still hadn't arrived to the station, Amy was getting worried and she called Jodi again. But this time, Jodi did not answer and Amy got Jodi's voicemail. Amy did leave a message on Jodi's house phone, but she figured that Jodi was probably just in the car on the way over to the station and would be there momentarily. But again, time kept passing and Jodi was not arriving. At 5 a.m., when Jodi still was not at KIMT, Amy called Jodi a third time, but again, no answer. And Jodi never showed up for work that day. Now, after the morning show was completed, her coworkers did call police and asked them to do a welfare check on Amy at her apartment, considering, again, she did not show up to the station. So police immediately drove over to Amy's apartment complex. Amy lived at the Keys apartment in a second-story unit in Mason City. This particular apartment complex backed up to a river embankment, and on the other side of this river was a park. And through the park, there were several walking trails. It was a large area, and it was a pretty popular park as well. Now, when authorities arrived to the complex, specifically the parking lot of the complex, they immediately noticed Jodi's red Mazda convertible in the parking lot. Along with that, there was clear evidence found that there was some sort of struggle nearby Jodi's car. Many of Jodi's personal belongings were scattered on the ground near where her car was parked. I'm talking her hairdryer. Her car key was found on the ground, and her car key was actually bent a little bit. Her earrings were also found, and her high heels had also been left behind. And what was even more concerning is that her high heels had been left behind after dragging drag marks through the ground, almost indicating like someone was dragging Jodi away before she kicked her shoes off. The mirror of Jodi's car was also bent backwards. And after this discovery, police radioed for more officers and their supervisors to arrive on the scene right away, and they blocked off the entire parking lot to continue their investigation. Now, initially, police did do a canvassing of the area. I'm talking the park, the river, around the complex, to see if they could locate Jodi. However, their search left them empty-handed. So the next thing that they did was actually go inside of Jodi's apartment to see if they could find anything else, any other evidence, any sign of a struggle, anything that could kind of put the pieces together as to what could have potentially happened here. And when walking into Jodi's apartment, they discovered some potential evidence that showed that Jodi potentially was not alone the night prior to her disappearance. In Jodi's apartment, police noticed several empty beer cans in the sink. There were also 2 wine glasses on the counter that had been emptied and drinking out of, and the toilet seat in Jodi's bathroom was left up. And while these findings could point to the fact that Jodi was spending time with someone else the night prior, the fact of the matter is that we don't know that to be fact. Police have been very candid in saying that the 2 wine glasses, they really don't mean much, because while they could point to the fact that Jodi was sharing some wine with someone else, it also could show that Jodi herself drank out of 2 wine glasses. We just don't know, because we don't know how long those wine glasses had been there, if she drank out of one night and one the other night. Again, that is still up for debate. Now, the one piece of evidence that was found at the crime scene, which was Jodi's car and around that area, there was a partial palm print discovered on Jodi's car. But again, this was 1995. The DNA technology was nowhere near as advanced as it is today, but police did collect it as potential evidence. So when it comes to cooking and eating, I have this problem because right now I really want to be healthy, but honestly, I do not have the time in my schedule right now that I would like to plan or meal prep. I'm getting married in 2025, and while I want to focus on maintaining a nutritious diet, I have a million other things on my mind and going on that don't allow me the time to carve out time for meal prepping or even just prioritizing healthier eating, even though that's exactly what I want. But luckily, that is where Hungry Root comes into the picture. Hungry Root truthfully is like having your own personalized nutritionist. They eliminate the hassle of weekly meal planning by providing delicious recipes customized to your taste preferences, nutritional needs, and health goals. With recipes tailored to diverse lifestyles, whether it's anti-inflammatory, gut-friendly, gluten-free, dairy-free, high protein, and more, they make it easy to enjoy high-quality, nutritious meals that align with your goals. Meal planning and cooking has become simple and stress-free with Hungry Root. All you have to do is share your preferences and goals, and Hungry Root will curate your cart with personalized recommendations that improve as they learn your likes and dislikes. Hungry Root's food is free of high fructose corn syrup, artificial sweeteners, and preservatives. They only source premium quality meat and seafood that are hormone and antibiotic free. Plus, all recipes can be prepared in 15 minutes or less. And with over 15,000 recipes shipped weekly, there is always something to suit every taste and nutritional preference. You guys are going to love Hungry Root as much as I do, so take advantage of this exclusive offer because for a limited time, you can get 40% off your first box plus get a free item in every box for life. Go to hungryroot.com/killer and use code KILLER. That's hungryroot.com/killer, code KILLER to get 40% off your first box and a free item of your choice for life. hungryroot.com/killer, code KILLER. Every time I get to talk to you guys about this brand, it truly is a pinch me moment. And that is Skims. I have been such a fan of all Skims products for years now, but specifically, I cannot stop raving about their intimates. Intimates are the foundation of every outfit, in my opinion, and making sure that I'm wearing pieces that are comfortable and functional have always been a struggle for me. I am larger chested, and before Skims, I was constantly finding myself spilling out of bras or bralettes, and truthfully, Skims is the only brand that I have found that keeps me secure and comfortable. For example, their Fits Everybody Razorback bralette has been a game changer for me. I am so supported throughout the whole day. I'm never tugging or adjusting straps or feeling insecure about the bralette or the way that it's making me look. I also have the Fits Everybody Scoop Neck bralette, and you guys, this is amazing. It is perfect for giving you that lift while also giving that same support. It's a 10 out of 10 all the way around. And don't even get me started on their underwear. The Fits Everybody thong has become a staple in my closet. The material melts into your body and it feels like you aren't wearing anything. I threw away every other pair of underwear that I owned when I tried the Fits Everybody thongs a few years ago, and I will never be going back. They are incredible. So shop Skims Best Intimates, including the Fits Everybody collection and more at skims.com and Skims stores. After you place your order, be sure to let them know that I sent you. Select podcast in the survey and be sure to select my show in the drop-down menu that follows. And if you're looking for the Fits Everybody gift for your Valentine or for yourself, Skims just launched their best Valentine's shop ever, available in sizes for women, men, and kids. So at this point, police tried to do everything they could to retrace Jodi's steps. They wanted to figure out what happened to Jodi leading up to her disappearance. And it really all started with that phone call from Amy at 4:10 a.m. on the 27th. They imagined that for Jodi, after getting this phone call from Amy saying that she overslept, Jodi probably woke up in a panic. She was frazzled getting up and she was frantically packing her bag to go to work with the intention of getting ready once she got there. Police then believe that after packing her bag and quickly exiting her apartment, she walked out to her car in the dimly lit parking lot. Again, this is going to be around 4:15 a.m. The sun is not out yet. It is still dark outside. And while the parking lot was not pitch black because there were some lamps and some street lights in the parking lot, it doesn't mean that it was fully lit by any means. It still had that eerie glow to it. Police then believe that Jodi did approach her car, and while she was in the middle of using her own key to manually open her car door, someone had approached her. They believe it was actually while she was in the middle of manually opening her car door that someone walked up to her, and that is where the struggle began. Now, after this, detectives did speak to some residents in the same apartment complex as Jodi, and that is when they learned that multiple residents had actually heard screams coming from out in the parking lot in the early morning hours hours of the 27th. One of Jodi's neighbors claimed that he was actually sitting down to read the paper at about 4:30 a.m. and he heard a loud scream coming from the parking lot, but again, didn't think too much of it at the time and also did not alert authorities. Now, police also spoke with another woman named Joan, and Joan lived right across the hall from Jodi in the complex. And according to Joan, she had some pretty interesting information because while Joan said that she didn't remember hearing anything the morning of the 27th, she claimed that on the night prior, which was the night of the 26th, she heard a man yelling outside of Jodi's apartment and banging on her apartment door. Joan said that she heard this man screaming loudly and yelling outside of Jodi's apartment, banging on the door, calling Jodi out by her name and saying that he knew that she was in there and asking her to open up the door. Now, the issue here was that Joan actually did not tell this exact account to authorities when she was initially questioned. It wasn't until months later when she was talking to a journalist that she said this, so it's hard to know how credible and reliable this account actually is. But again, according to Joan, the night prior, there was a man banging and screaming on Jodi's door. Now, it was also equally as important for authorities to figure out what Jodi's day looked like on the 26th. They wanted to figure out if anything was out of the ordinary, if maybe she had gotten into a fight with someone, if she was behaving in an odd manner. They wanted to figure out what Jodi's day looked like on June 26th. And what they learned was that on the 26th, Jodi was at the Mason City Country Club representing KIMT after she did her morning show on the news. So she goes to KIMT in the morning, everything seems fine, she does her morning show. After going to KIMT, she then goes to the Mason City Country Club where she is participating in this golf event representing KIMT. After the golf event, there was actually a dinner at the country club. So Jodi went home very quickly, changed her outfit, and then went back to the country club to attend the dinner. While she was at the dinner, everyone said that she seemed fine. She seemed in good spirits. She didn't seem like anything was wrong, and she enjoyed herself at this portion of the event. People who were with Jodi that night claim that she left at approximately 8 p.m. and went back to her apartment. Now, police were confident that she went back to her apartment right after this because police figured out through phone records that Jodi made a phone call from her apartment at 8:24 p.m. Now, I'm saying this because we're going to circle back around to this. This is important. So remember this. She makes a phone call at 8:24 p.m. to her friend Kelly. Now, she makes this phone call from inside of her apartment on her landline. On the phone, Jodi was telling her friend all about what her weekend looked like the weekend prior to this. She talked about how her and her friends went water skiing together, and Jodi actually kept a journal, and she wrote about this water skiing weekend in her journal. She said that she had a great time with her friends. They enjoyed water skiing during the day and bar hopping at night. And one of the friends that Jodi was with on this water skiing weekend was a man named John Van Cise. Now, I want to kind of talk to you about John Van Cise for a moment because there's no way we can get through talking about Jodi's case without talking about John. So John and Jodi were fairly new friends. The two would hang out at Jodi's favorite local bar in Mason City called The Other Place. It was either be the two of them or a group of friends, and everyone would go to The Other Place and they would enjoy a few cocktails, a few beers, and just have a good time. Now, John was significantly older than Jodi. He was 49 years old at the time, and he was a salesman from Newton, Iowa, who had recently moved to Mason City. And the reason that John and Jodi had even met to begin with was because John had moved into the same apartment complex as Jodi when he first moved to Mason City. But after that, he relocated to a different apartment in town. So he wasn't at the same apartment complex for too long. But interestingly enough, on the morning of the 27th, when police were at the scene of Jodi's complex, they were in the parking lot, they were canvassing the area. While police were there, John actually showed up to this scene. So John pulls up to police in his red pickup truck. He rolls down the window and he identifies himself to officers and tells them that he was the last person to see Jodi. So at this point, John gets out of the car and he continues to tell police that he was with Jodi the night prior, on the night of the 26th. John said that after the golf event that Jodi had attended, Jodi stopped over at his apartment to watch a video of Jodi's birthday party that was just, again, a few weeks prior, because like I mentioned in the beginning, Jodi's birthday was in the beginning of June. So that was in the beginning of June. Now we're at the end of June. They had this birthday party for Jodi. Apparently there was some home video that was taken at the birthday party, and Jodi, according to John, went over to his apartment to watch this home video together. Jodi's birthday party happened a few weeks prior, and it was at a local bar called Sully's. And according to John, it was a few of Jodi's close friends. They all had a great time, and that is why he wanted to show her the video. Now, again, what we know from the night prior is that Jodi left the golf event at 8 p.m. From John's story and his version of events, he said that Jodi came to his apartment directly after leaving the golf event. Now, from the country club to John's apartment, it is less than a 4-mile drive, which would have put Jodi at John's apartment at approximately 8:10, maybe a few minutes after that, if she did leave at approximately 8 p.m. from the country club. Now, John claimed that when Jodi arrived to his apartment, the two watched the video together, which was a little over 15 minutes long. And then after the video, John said that him and Jodi chatted for a few minutes about John's daughters and water skiing before Jodi left and went home. Now, if you remember, I just told you, and like I said, to remember this would be important. Jodi had made a phone call from her apartment, her landline, at 8:24 p.m., and that was confirmed through phone records. Now, if we factor in Jodi leaving the golf event at 8 p.m., the 10-minute drive to John, the then 15-minute video that John claims that they watched, that's already putting them at 8:25 p.m. So there is no way that this timeline works. These two things cannot be true at the same time, because this doesn't account for the also 5-minute drive it would have taken Jodi to drive back to her apartment, get inside her apartment, and then call her friend. If that was the case, Jodi probably wouldn't have gotten back to her apartment until about 8:35, 8:40, something along those lines. So with John's timeline, this just obviously left police with more questions than answers, and it also left them very suspicious, as you could probably imagine, of John Van Cise. So with that being said, I do want to talk to you about the relationship that John and Jodi had together and kind of what that looked like from an outsider's perspective versus what John claimed that it was. Because according to John, he characterized his relationship with Jodi as more of a father-daughter relationship than anything else. However, others who knew them were not so sure about that. Mutuals of Jodi and John figured that John definitely had more of a crush on Jodi. It did very much seem like John had an infatuation with her, that he liked her very much more than a friend. It seemed like he cared about her more than a friend. It didn't just seem like this father-daughter relationship that John was trying to portray. And something else that was really bizarre in all of this, and it's really bizarre no matter how you spin it, is the fact that John had actually named his boat after Jodi. John had a boat, and this was the boat that everyone would use to go water skiing. John told reporters, because he also really liked to be involved in the media at this time, right after Jodi's disappearance, he was very, very cooperative with the reporters and the journalists who would constantly ask him questions. He was very eager to be in the media, and so when he was talking to them, he explained that the reason that he named his boat after Jodi was because Jodi meant so much to him and to everyone around him, and he wanted to name the boat after her. And it was really as simple as that. And to be clear, he did name the boat after Jodi prior to Jodi's disappearance. It was after he met Jodi and then prior to her disappearance. So people definitely found that to be a little bit odd, but I do want to mention that nowhere in Jodi's journals that she kept did she ever suggest anything suspicious regarding John. Jodi always had very positive and complimentary things to say about John in her journals, details. She was always talking about him in a very good light, so it didn't seem like she was afraid of John or suspicious of John or uncomfortable around John by any means. Now, as far as John's alibi, because again, police were curious as to what John was doing on the morning of Jodi's disappearance, John claimed that he was on a walk with his friend LaDonna, which was something that they did every morning. This was a walk that they took every morning between 6:30 and 8 a.m. And LaDonna did confirm this. She said she was in fact with John during this time. And prior to the walk with LaDonna, John's alibi was pretty simple. He said that he was sleeping. It was 4 a.m. He was in bed. He was sleeping. That was his alibi. And there really was no way for police to confirm this or deny it at this point. But those close to John, his best friends, everyone who knew him personally said that there was no way that John would have been the type of person who did something like this. They all believe that the police pointed the finger at John from the very beginning because he was the easy person to point the finger at. His friends claim that what comes off as an obsession or an over-infatuation towards Jodi was really just John wanting to protect her. And along with this, John also stated that he had a girlfriend at the time of Jodi's disappearance. He said that when Jodi went missing, he had a girlfriend. However, they broke up shortly after her disappearance because of all of the rising speculation against John. Now, John was given 2 polygraph tests, but those results have never been made public by authorities. However, John has been very vocal over the fact that he did pass both of those tests. Now, in 2010, so many years after Jodi's disappearance, we're talking 15 years, there was a new lead investigator who took over the case, and this is when John actually began to refuse to talk to authorities. In the beginning of the investigation, he was very cooperative. He spoke to them whenever they needed to, but by 2010, he was done talking. He did not want to speak with them any longer. And then in 2017, John was actually subpoenaed to appear in front of a grand jury, which these hearings were never made public, so we don't know exactly what this was for, but we do know that John was never indicted for anything. And for these hearings, he did have to hand over his fingerprints and palm prints. And if those ended up being a match to the palm print found at the crime scene, we probably would have heard about that by now. But again, nothing has ever really been said about that. Now, in 2019, John did come forward with a statement where he again claimed that he had no involvement in the abduction of Jodi and that he wouldn't talk to police until the real abductor was caught. Now, along with this, John actually said the reason that he was making this statement to begin with was because he had been recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and he wanted to put out a public statement before his condition had worsened, where he could adamantly deny any involvement and really just say his piece with it all. And John did end up passing away in December of 2024. Now, obviously, with John's passing, police cannot talk to John anymore. They cannot interview him. They cannot question him. They can't get more information or answers out of him. So it definitely leaves authorities with a lot more unanswered questions pertaining to John. I would say the biggest thing and the biggest question I had pertaining to John personally was the fact that John was so adamant that he was the last person to see Jodi. How do we know that to be fact? How does John know that to be fact? How is he so eager to go to authorities and say, I was the last person to see her? How do you know that? I guess that would be my main question. But there are other theories in Jodi's case. One big one was that there were a lot of rumors and speculation that Jodi had been an investigative reporter to a drug ring that was running through Mason County. People thought that she was being an investigative reporter and that maybe she got too close to people that were involved in this drug ring. Maybe she saw something she wasn't supposed to see, and maybe that's why that was the motive for her disappearance. But there really was no evidence that pointed or suggested to this whatsoever, other than people's just speculation. Jodi was not an investigative reporter. She never was an investigative reporter, and she never wanted to be an investigative reporter. She was very happy with her job doing the morning show. That was where her passion lied. And so again, this claim was just baseless. Now, another theory that took this case into a whole different direction was when a tip was called into authorities from someone who said that police should look into a man named Tony Tony Jackson regarding Jodi's disappearance. Now, at the time that Jodi went missing, Tony lived a few blocks away from Jodi's news station at KIMT. Along with this, Jodi had been convicted of multiple rapes in St. Paul, Minnesota in 1997, so 2 years after Jodi went missing. Now, in the cases that Tony was convicted of, they claimed that Tony had a fanny pack where he kept handcuffs, rope, duct tape, and a gun. So he essentially had a rape kit with him. Now, Tony's MO typically involved him breaking into other people's apartments, but there was one instance where he attacked a woman in her car, similarly to Jodi. But not only that, the big red flag here was that in 1995, at the time that Jodi was abducted, Tony was living in Mason City. And this raised a lot of red flags because Tony was a convicted rapist, and he was living in the same town, only a short drive over from where Jodi lived. Now, all in all, Tony was convicted of 4 out of 5 rapes, but again, these were completely unrelated to Jodi's case. And during the time that he was leading up to his trial for these rapes, there was another inmate who claimed that he knew Tony in prison, and this inmate acted as an informant and claimed that Tony had told him himself that he had murdered an anchor woman years prior. Now, this informant said that Tony Jackson actually wrote a rap about this murder, like a rap song, and that in the song he referenced burying a woman's body on a farm in a town called Tiffin, Iowa. Now, Tiffin, Iowa was a few hundred miles away from Mason City. Where things get weird in this is that the day prior to Jodi's disappearance, Tony bought a car, and shortly after Jodi's disappearance, Tony racked up hundreds of miles on this car, and by shortly after, I just mean in a few days. So because of this, because of the rap song, investigators did go out to Tiffin, Iowa, because they were leaving no stone left unturned in this. So they go out to this farm in Tiffin, Iowa. They brought cadaver dogs, but once the dogs did their search, they did pick up on some bones. However, it turned out to be raccoon bones. So it was not anything related to Jodi or any human remains. It was simply just animal remains. And since all of this speculation around Tony has come forward and said that this was all fabricated. He said that he had never been to Tiffin, Iowa. He still has never been to Tiffin, Iowa. He also denies ever knowing, coming into contact, or murdering Jodi. And Tony did admit that even though he is a rapist, he is not a murderer. Now, I'm not saying even though to lighten his conviction and to lighten the fact that he is still a rapist, but from Tony's perspective, he's saying that even though he is a rapist, it doesn't make him a murderer, and it especially does not mean that he murdered Jodi. Tony actually said that the first time he heard about Jodi's case was when he was already in jail, and along with that, there was no evidence that pointed to Tony being responsible for this other than the car and the circumstantial evidence surrounding his car and the drive and the mileage he put on the car. But Tony's DNA was not found anywhere on the scene or around Jodi's apartment complex. It had nothing to do with her disappearance. So authorities are very confident that Tony Jackson is not involved in this, and he has never been charged or convicted with anything related to Jodi. Now, the investigation then took another turn when police set their sights on another sex offender in Mason City. This was a man who actually lived in Austin, Minnesota, which was about an hour away from Mason City, but this man spent quite some time in Mason City as well. This man's name is Thomas Korskaden, and Thomas had been in and out of jail for multiple sexual assault and rape charges starting in 1970. In 1995, Thomas drove a white van, and according to a witness who lived nearby Jodi's complex, they claimed that there was a white van lingering around Jodi's complex in the days leading up and on the morning of Jodi's disappearance. Now, Thomas's ex-wife has also claimed that she believes that Thomas had an infatuation with Jodi, and even on one occasion got angry when he wasn't able to get tickets to a KIMT event because he wanted to see her at this event, and he was mad that he wasn't able to get tickets to go. Now, suspicions escalated when in 2004, authorities were sitting down with Thomas to talk about an unrelated case, but when talking to Thomas, the detectives made a reference to Mason City and to Jodi's disappearance. Detectives claimed that during the interrogation, they said something along the lines of Jodi's disappearance or Jodi is missing. And when Thomas heard this, they immediately noticed a shift in his behavior. They said that Thomas actually smiled to himself and looked back at authorities and said, Jodi is dead. And from what police took from that is that that is Thomas indicating that he knows more than authorities do, because Jodi's remains have never been found. She has never been recovered. So to have Thomas sitting across the table saying, no, she's not missing, she's dead, that leads to speculation that he knows more than he is saying. Along with the little smile, the smirk, she's dead, it just made police question if this was their guy, if Thomas was the man that they were looking for this whole time. Now, a warrant was issued for Thomas's DNA to look at the palm print. They wanted to see Thomas's palm print and compare it to the one on the scene to see if it could be a match, but it was in fact not a match. And in 2004, investigators cleared Thomas as a suspect, and they announced that they were going to be moving on in the investigation. Now, in June 2001, Jodi was declared legally dead, and for Jodi's family, this was a very difficult decision, as you can imagine. For them, this was not a sign of them giving up. This really was her family's only hope at getting access to settle her estate. That really was the only reason that they went through with declaring her deceased. And they didn't want this decision to change the momentum in the investigation, because the police that have worked on this case, the investigators that have worked on this case have all worked tirelessly and diligently to try and figure out exactly what has happened to Jodi. This is not a case of an investigation that has not gotten enough attention or an investigation where resources have been lacking. That is not what has happened here. This case has been very active for investigators. They are constantly pursuing new leads and trying to figure out what happened to Jodi. This has been something that has been a long time coming. And in the past 30 years, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of tips and leads sent to the investigators. Now, the big question in this case that still goes unanswered to this day, and investigators have said this, is why the 27th? They figured that if they can figure out why Jodi disappeared that specific morning, it'll help piece together some of the bigger questions in this case. Why did Jodi have to go missing on the 27th? Why not the 28th? Why not the 26th? Why was it the morning of the 27th? Was this a blitz attack? Was it a stalker? Was it someone who Jodi knew in her personal life? Now, the only issue that personally I have with a blitz attack, and you guys can let me know what you think, is I have a hard time believing that if this was a random blitz attack, that Jodi would still be missing. And I have read this theory through my research as well, and people have said that if this was to be a random attack, if this was someone who just randomly decided to attack Jodi one morning, that it would have been easier to locate her remains, and not finding her to this day would have been less likely. The complexity of her case doesn't seem like this was someone who just saw Jodi, decided they wanted to attack her, did it, and now she's never been found. Now, I do want to circle back to the white pickup truck that Jodi reported was following her in October, the year prior to her disappearance in 1994, because what we learned later is that there was actually another woman who called police to try and tell them about this same white pickup truck following her the day after Jodi's disappearance. So on June 28th, there was a woman who claimed that she was being followed by the similar white pickup truck. So there definitely could have been a stalker lingering throughout Mason County as well. That's always a possibility. Now, the issue that police have said that they have with the stalker theory was the fact that on the morning of the 27th, Jodi was already out of her typical routine on the morning of her disappearance. Stalkers work on routine. They like to learn their victims' routines. They like to be very timely. They like to be very punctual with it. They learn the ins and outs of what their victims do. And the lead investigator has said that they believe that if a stalker knew Jodi's every move and her routine, that with Jodi running late on the morning of the 27th and already being knocked out of her typical routine, because again, she typically got to the news station at 4 a.m., but on this morning of the 27th, she didn't walk out to her car until about 4:15, 4:20. So it would have thrown Jodi off of her schedule, and in turn, it could have thrown a stalker off as well. And they believed that if someone wanted to take Jodi, if this was a stalker, and if a stalker decided that they were going to, stake out and wait for Jodi, they have a hard time believing that a stalker would have waited an additional hour after Jodi would have left. They believe it's likely that the stalker would have just given up at that point and gone home, or would have followed Jodi later throughout the day and wouldn't have done it at that time. Maybe they would have waited till the 28th. Maybe they would have waited until later if that was still their goal and their motive. But again, we don't know, and anything is possible in this case. And that's the big thing when talking about Jodi's disappearance, is that there's so many more questions than answers. That's why this case is still unsolved. That's why we still don't know what happened to Jodi. And I just find this case so crazy. Jodi has never been seen again after 4 o'clock a.m., around 4:15, 4:20 a.m. on June 27th of 1995. But on the flip side of that, it's not like she left without a trace, because when you look at her car, there's a clear sign of a struggle. Her things are sprawled all over the place. She has, her bent car key, and her footprints are being dragged through the dirt. This definitely indicates that something horrible and horrific happened here. But what is still the unknown. We still don't know what. We still don't know why. We still don't know who did this to Jodi. And like I said, police are still actively working to try and solve this case. This case is actually what got a lot of these officers into law enforcement to begin with. I saw many interviews where officers have said that this case in particular has haunted them from the very beginning, because for a lot of people, this is the big fear. This is everyone's biggest fear. The big unknown. This is the disappearance in the middle of the night with someone who maybe is still lingering around. We just don't know. Now, the reward for information on Jodi's disappearance is $50,000, and all authorities are asking for is Jodi's remains. They have claimed that this is not to turn anyone in. This is not for anything other than just finding Jodi and bringing her home, and hopefully finding justice for her along the way. And with that being said, you guys, that is the case of Jodi Huisentruit. I am so curious to know what you think about this one. Please let me know your theories in the comments below. I cannot wait to talk to you guys about this more. We will definitely be talking more about this case over on Patreon when we do our Patreon lives, because I'll be so curious to know your theories over there as well. So again, definitely click the link in the description box if you would like to join and be a part of that. And again, with that being said, you guys, that's all for me today. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Killer Instinct. Again, if you're new here, hi, my name's Savannah. I'm your host of Killer Instinct. Make sure you go ahead and hit that subscribe button before you go. That way you never miss an episode. We post weekly here every single Wednesday. You're not going to want to miss it. I'll be back next week with a brand new one for you guys. And until then, stay safe. Bye, guys.